Hey guys, tonight we step into a workshop you probably wouldn't survive without a serious pair of fireproof sandals. Imagine it, the air so hot it makes your eyelashes curl, hammers clanging in rhythms like thunder, and molten gold spilling in streams that look beautiful until you realize, oh right, that's liquid metal, and if it splashes on you, you're a goner. But don't worry, you're just visiting in story form, safe and cozy under your blanket. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where people are listening from, and it's wild how many of you are curled up in different corners of the globe right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a stone tunnel beneath Olympus, the kind of passageway you'd expect to lead to a secret wine cellar, not the lair of a god. The air is thick with smoke, thicker than any barbecue pit, and tinged with a sweetness because the fires here aren't only wood and coal. They're alight with mysterious fuels, maybe even divine, that make flames shimmer in colors you don't see in your average backyard bonfire. The tunnel opens and suddenly the forge yawns wide. It's cavernous, almost cathedral-like, except instead of stained glass windows, there are walls glowing with veins of hot metal. Sparks rain down from above, where unseen mechanisms shower the air with the fallout of constant hammering. You smell iron, you smell bronze, you smell gold being coaxed into furniture that gleams like sunlight you could touch. And there's Hephaestus, bent over the anvil. He doesn't look like Zeus. No lightning bolt abs, no sparkling teeth like an action figure hero. Instead, he's sturdy, shoulders knotted with muscle, hair damp with sweat, one leg dragging as he limps between furnaces. The limp is permanent. It's part of him, as much as the hammer in his hand. You watch him work, and you realize he doesn't need thunderbolts or winged sandals to command awe. All he needs is the hiss of molten gold hitting cold water, the sudden steam rising like spirits, and the steady beat of his hammer marking time. The furniture he's shaping glows with perfection. Chairs so smooth you could see your reflection. Tables that catch every spark in their surface and throw it back like constellations. But here's the oddity. Nobody ever seems to sit on these creations. You tilt your head, wondering if this is art or sabotage, or maybe both. Historical fact: the Greeks placed blacksmiths on the edge of society. Their work was essential. Without them, no swords, no plows, no jewelry. But their smoky forges marked them as liminal figures, halfway between civilization and something a little frightening. Archaeologists still find remnants of early smithing workshops built deliberately on the outskirts of towns, where the clang and smoke wouldn't disrupt daily life. So it's fitting that Hephaestus himself lives in this hidden space, under the shining marble halls of Olympus. Quirky tidbit. Some later storytellers claimed Hephaestus built not just furniture but also automated doors for Olympus, ones that opened and closed on their own, basically the world's first sliding doors. You picture Hera sweeping through like a queen at a grocery store entrance, and suddenly the grandeur feels a little less epic and a little more mall-like. And here's a debate that still lingers. Historians still argue whether the Greeks really believed in these technological marvels as more than metaphors. Were golden tripods that rolled themselves around supposed to be real ancient robots? Or were they a poetic way of showing that Hephaestus' skill surpassed human understanding? No one can quite pin it down. And maybe that's the charm. It hovers between history and imagination, just like the shimmer in the forge's smoke. Back in the workshop, you watch him lean over the latest project, a throne, its back curling like seashells, its arms studded with gold inlays. The seat looks inviting, as if designed for a queen. But there's a faint tension in the way Hephaestus smirks at it, like a prankster who knows the punchline is about to land. He's humming to himself, low and steady, and with every hammer strike, it's like he's embedding not just artistry but intent. You wonder what drives him. Maybe it's spite. After all, this is the god who was hurled off Olympus as a child because his mother thought he wasn't handsome enough. Maybe it's pure craft, the joy of making something that confuses people, like those modern art chairs you see in galleries that look stunning but leave you asking, do I sit on this or just admire it? As you shuffle closer, a golden automaton glides past. Its form is vaguely human, feminine even, with features smoothed like wax. It carries a tray of glowing ingots as easily as you might carry a cup of tea. Its head turns slightly, and though it has no eyes, you get the uncomfortable feeling it notices you. For a moment, you think, this is either genius engineering or the start of a bad sci-fi film. Then, it disappears into the smoke. Hephaestus doesn't look up. He knows what's in his forge, knows who moves through it, mortal or machine. He just keeps hammering, letting you exist in his world as long as you don't disturb the rhythm. You realize the strangeness of this place. It's both homey and hostile. The heat could kill you, but the glowing gold feels oddly comforting. The hammering could deafen you, but the rhythm lulls you like a heartbeat. Maybe that's the paradox of Hephaestus himself. A god unwanted on Olympus, but indispensable to it. Mocked for his limp, but revered for his craft. The throne is nearly finished. He steps back, wipes his brow, and you glimpse the design more fully. Gorgeous, gleaming, and just a little sinister. You think of those assembly-required chairs you've bought online, the ones where you sit down and discover 3 screws are still loose. Only this isn't IKEA. This is divine engineering with consequences. Somewhere above, the Olympians recline, feasting and squabbling as usual, unaware that their next seating arrangement might turn into the most awkward family intervention in mythological history. You smile, imagining the scene to come, but for now, you stay here in the smoky forge, watching the god of fire polish his golden trap. The air grows thicker. Sparks slow, as if even fire is getting drowsy. You breathe in the metallic tang, steady and strange, and feel the forge's heartbeat echo in your chest. You blink against the haze, and when your eyes adjust again, Hephaestus is leaning on his hammer, shoulders rising and falling with steady, work-worn breaths. You get the sense he's used to being seen as just a shadow in the corner of Olympus stories, the guy no one voted for when the roster of glamorous gods was drawn up. Zeus with his thunder, Apollo with his cheekbones, Athena with her wisdom and her helmet collection. You could print their faces on posters and people would cheer. But Hephaestus? He's the backstage crew. No spotlight, no grand speeches. And yet here you are, face to face with him, realizing that without him, the stage collapses. Quite literally, those Olympian palaces wouldn't be gleaming marble without his chisels, nor would their banquet tables shine without his hammer shaping them. You suspect the gods might not even notice that. They're too busy hurling lightning bolts or writing moody poetry by lyre light. You watch him limp across the forge floor, one leg dragging, the other strong and steady. It's not a detail he can hide. Myth after myth makes sure to mention it, as if storytellers needed a reminder that gods could be flawed. But that limp never stopped him from mastering every alloy, every fire, every tool that turned stubborn metal into wonders. You can almost hear the irony. The god dismissed for his body becomes the god whose body of work defines Olympus itself. Fact check for your sleepy brain. In Homer's Iliad, Hephaestus crafts Achilles' shield, one of the most elaborate descriptions of art in ancient literature. The shield gleams with images of cities, constellations, wars, and harvest festivals, all hammered into bronze and gold. Think of it as the original movie reel, except instead of rolling, it's frozen in metal. Scholars sometimes marvel that this wasn't just a battle accessory. It was a cosmology lesson, a map of existence, disguised as defense. Not bad for the god people like to forget. Now for the quirk. A handful of late antique authors joke that Hephaestus invented something like bellows that worked on their own, puffing air into his furnaces. Some describe them as bronze dogs that barked fire, others as mechanical lungs. Either way, you imagine him hitting a switch, leaning back with a smirk, while his automated gadgets did the heavy breathing. Basically, Hephaestus invented the first lazy blacksmith mode. But here's where historians still argue. Was Hephaestus meant to embody human ingenuity at its peak, or was he more of a cautionary tale? His brilliance came with isolation. His workshop is far from Olympus's dinner parties. Some scholars say his myths reflect how ancient Greeks felt about craftsmen, admired their output, distrusted the people. Others say the stories actually celebrated his resilience, showing that brains could outweigh brawn. The answer floats, unresolved, like smoke that never clears. Back in the forge, he lowers himself onto a bench, though of course it's not just any bench. The thing glitters as if it resents being called furniture. Hephaestus runs a hand over the surface, the gesture not proud but thoughtful, like a chess player contemplating the next move. You realize he doesn't build merely for beauty. He builds for irony, for power, maybe even for revenge. And there's a weariness, too. You picture the Olympian banquets above, Hera sipping ambrosia, Zeus making pompous toasts, Hermes cracking jokes that aren't as funny as he thinks. Hephaestus isn't there. He isn't invited. Maybe once or twice he tried to attend, limped into the hall, only to find chairs mysteriously full or eyes politely avoiding his. So he retreated, down here where the fires keep him company. You shift uncomfortably, because suddenly the gold furniture doesn't look like luxury. It looks like commentary. The smoothness dares people to sit, but the designs whisper, you don't belong here. It's the kind of art you find in modern museums, where you're not sure if the point is to admire it or to feel judged by it. And maybe that's the heart of Hephaestus. Not charisma, not conquest, but irony hammered into form. He can't hurl lightning like his father, so he builds chairs that will trap the king of God's queen. He can't dazzle with beauty like Apollo, so he forges devices that make mortals scratch their heads centuries later. The forge hums louder, and the golden automaton drifts past again, carrying new ingots. This time, it pauses, as though waiting for an order. Hephaestus doesn't even glance. He trusts his machines, the way other gods trust their chariots. The automaton hesitates, then glides away, silent as a ghost. You can't help thinking, this god doesn't just shape metal. He shapes companions, replacements, reflections. Perhaps being overlooked has its upside. When no one's watching, you can create things they wouldn't dare imagine. You lean back against the stone wall. The heat wraps around you like a blanket that's a little too hot but oddly comforting. You picture the Olympians laughing above, oblivious that the nobody of their pantheon is right now finishing the piece that will make them gasp, groan, and bargain. The hammer rises again, steady, sure. Hephaestus hums his low tune, maybe some old sea nymph lullaby from his childhood days under the waves. Sparks rise like fireflies, gold gleams, and you realize you've stepped into the company of a god who never needed anyone's vote to matter. You hear it before you see it, the echo of a fall, a rush of wind, the unmistakable impact of body against rock and surf. Hephaestus has told this story 1,000 times without saying a word, because his limp is the living footnote. You picture it now. A baby god, not yet skilled with hammer or fire, plucked up by his own mother and hurled off the shining balcony of Olympus. Hera, queen of heaven, queen of bad parenting decisions, decided her child didn't meet the beauty standards of divinity. So, down he went. You flinch because the thought is brutal. It's one thing for mortals to abandon children, they did, harshly when times were hard, but for a goddess to toss her infant from the divine penthouse. That's cold, even by myth standards. You imagine the fall lasting forever, like those dreams where you drop and never wake. For Hephaestus, though, there was no waking up in a safe bed. There was sea spray. There was bone-breaking, spirit-crushing impact. And yet he lived. Mainstream fact here, ancient sources disagree about how long he fell. Some say he plunged for a full day and night before landing. A god can survive such things, apparently, though you'd have to imagine his sense of self-worth got dented along with his bones. Quirky tidbit. In some versions, he didn't land on sea or rock, but on the island of Lemnos, a volcanic land rich in metalwork. The locals there later worshipped him as their special god. It's almost as if geography looked at his fall and said, "Don't worry, buddy, I've got just the terrain for you. Lava, smoke, and plenty of ore." Imagine being adopted not by a family, but by an island with a matching personality. But historians still argue whether Hera threw him out alone, or whether Zeus joined in the family-friendly sport of celestial child-tossing. Some traditions claim Hephaestus sided with his mother during a marital spat, chained Zeus, and got punished with the same kind of yeet that had launched him years before. It's unclear whether the limp came from the first fall or the second, and scholars keep circling the question like detectives at a crime scene with too many versions of the witness statement. You picture the scene anyway. A helpless child tumbling through clouds, arms flailing, screaming, swallowed by the wind. If this were a modern movie, there'd be dramatic slow motion, Hera's face lit cold and determined, and a long camera pan down through Olympus's golden columns into the abyss. But since this is Greek mythology, there's no redemption arc yet, just the hard splat of fate. What you realize, though, is that the limp, the mark of the fall, becomes his trademark. He can't erase it, Every step reminds him. Every clang of his hammer is a counterpoint. Yes, I fell, but I rise again with every strike. Maybe you start to wonder whether his genius for traps, for revenge furniture, for mechanical companions, all started right here, with the knowledge that the world isn't safe, not even from family. And if you're going to survive, you'd better outthink everyone. The forge around you seems to flicker with that memory. You see smoke curl into the shape of a child, tumbling, then dispersing into sparks. Hephaestus doesn't look at you. He doesn't need to. His limp is enough storytelling. It says, "I was unwanted, but I made myself indispensable, and no throne on Olympus can erase me now." And of course, your modern brain can't help slipping in a joke. If ancient myths were reality shows, Hera would be voted off immediately for worst parenting move. The gods would still be drinking wine, but somewhere in the background, Hephaestus would be plotting the most satisfying next episode twist. The hammer clangs again, loud, like thunder muted underground. Each strike feels like defiance. Each spark rising feels like a phoenix wing, though maybe one wing drags a little lower than the other. You're not sure if you're supposed to feel pity or admiration. Probably both. And as you watch, the throne on the workbench gleams brighter. It looks less like furniture and more like destiny. The ironic crown jewel of a god who was never crowned. The clang of the hammer fades, and the forge smoke twists again, this time curling into a gentler memory. You follow it, like tracing a path through steam on a bathroom mirror, and suddenly the firelight softens into the shimmer of seawater. You feel the weightlessness first, the buoyant hush of an ocean current, and then you see two figures gliding toward the fallen child, Thetis and Eurynome. Two sea nymphs, sisters of the tide, collectors of castaways. It's a strange comfort. The god thrown away by his divine mother finds new mothers beneath the waves. Thetis, who will one day mother Achilles, scoops him up with arms that smell of salt and coral. Eurynome, who had once danced on the edge of creation itself, steadies his tiny body. You can imagine them exchanging looks, half sorrow, half wonder, that the king and queen of heaven could be so careless, and yet the sea could be so generous. Historical fact? Thetis was no minor goddess. She was courted by Zeus and Poseidon before prophecy warned them her child would outshine his father. To avoid that power struggle, they married her off to a mortal, Peleus, and thus Achilles came to be. So the irony here is sharp. A woman destined to give birth to one of Greece's most famous warriors also nursed the lame god who would craft that warrior's shining armor. The ocean wove their stories together long before Troy burned. Quirky tidbit. Eurynome isn't always remembered in detail, but some traditions claimed she once ruled as a goddess of all creation, before later myths sidelined her. Imagine that. An ex-CEO of the cosmos retiring to the sea, now running a daycare for abandoned gods. You can't help but smirk at the mental picture. Once upon a time, I managed the universe, and now I babysit the kid Olympus didn't want. But historians still argue whether Hephaestus lived in the sea for years, crafting and learning, or whether this was more of a symbolic interlude, a mythical way of saying that his artistry came from liquid places, the fusion of fire and water. Some scholars imagine a boy god hammering in coral caves, an anvil propped on a whale's back. Others say the story is metaphor, that his time underwater represents his exile from society, learning skills in the margins before re-emerging with something no one else could match. You swim through the vision. The water is cool, the forge heat gone. Instead of sparks, there are fish darting like quicksilver, their scales flashing like coins in a fountain. Thetis hums a song, half lullaby, half tide chant. And Eurynome guides little hands toward tools. Not hammers yet, not chisels, but simple shapes. Shells smoothed, coral polished, gold flecks sifted from sand. You picture a child sitting cross-legged on the seafloor, fashioning jewelry for dolphins, practicing the art of turning raw into radiant. It's soothing down here. No judgment, no laughter from Olympians, just the constant sway of kelp forests and the slow blink of sea turtles. You imagine Hephaestus growing sturdier in this strange foster home, shoulders tightening from lifting shells heavier than his body, lungs stretching from holding breath longer than mortals could dream, and yet always, the limp remained. Maybe less painful in the water, but never gone. The sea offered reprieve, not erasure. And what do foster mothers teach, if not resilience? Thetis and Eurynome didn't make him handsome, but they taught him that beauty could live in objects, in things made by hand. That if your body won't win applause, your craft might. You watch as Hephaestus takes a shell, polishes until it gleams, and places it on a pedestal of coral. Even now, he's rehearsing for the golden traps of later years. There's also a faintly comedic undertone. You can't help but imagine Poseidon stumbling across this little seaside workshop, rolling his eyes at nymphs hosting a divine arts and crafts club. Really? Glitter shells and metal scraps? That's what you're babysitting down here? But the joke is on him. Because those underwater playthings are the training ground for machines that will later outsmart the whole Olympian pantheon. The vision flickers, and suddenly you're back in the forge. The smoke clings heavier, as if jealous of the sea's gentle embrace. Hephaestus wipes his brow and mutters something you can't quite catch. Maybe it's thanks to his nymph mothers. Maybe it's a reminder to himself. You were thrown away, but you were also lifted. The hammer strikes again, but now you see more clearly. Each blow is a ripple of ocean memory, a tide turned to metal. Fire and water, fall and rescue, rejection and embrace, they all echo here in the throne that glimmers like sunlight on the sea's surface. And you think, maybe that's why the furniture looks so alive, so ready to shift from beauty to trap. It isn't just fire-forged. It's tide-touched too. A piece of Olympus that remembers what it is to be cast out, and what it is to be lifted up again. The throne gleams brighter now, the forge fire licking its edges until gold looks almost liquid. You step closer, and for a moment, you could swear the thing breathes, like it's inhaling the heat and exhaling a shimmer. Hephaestus wipes his hands on a soot-streaked cloth, takes a step back, and tilts his head. This isn't just furniture. This is an argument, hammered in gold, addressed to one very specific audience, Hera, the mother who tossed him aside. You imagine him muttering, "Here's a little return gift, mother. Hope you enjoy." The kind of tone you use when you hand someone a suspiciously wrapped present that jingles wrong when shaken. And sure enough, the stories say he polished this golden throne and sent it up to Olympus as an offering, so beautiful that Hera couldn't resist claiming it, which is exactly what he counted on. Fact break. Ancient sources like the Bibliotheca tell us Hephaestus crafted a chair of gold that trapped Hera the instant she sat on it. She couldn't rise, couldn't wiggle free, couldn't even call for help without looking ridiculous. Imagine the Queen of Olympus, used to commanding gods and mortals alike, suddenly stuck like someone who bought the wrong size jeans and refuses to admit it. Quirky tidbit. Some versions say the throne wasn't just sticky, it was invisible chains or binding arms that snapped shut. A little like those carnival rides where a safety bar slams down across your chest whether you're ready or not. You can almost hear Hera shriek, "I said I don't need help. Wait, what is this?" And historians still argue whether this whole throne episode was satire about power dynamics or an actual piece of revenge myth. Was it just the Greeks poking fun at the idea that even mighty Hera could be humbled by household furniture? Or was it a story about Hephaestus reclaiming dignity, using his skill to force the gods to acknowledge him? The debate flickers like firelight, interpretation shifting with each scholar's gaze. Back in the forge, you watch Hephaestus trace his hand over the armrest, a small grin twitching at his lips. This is no spontaneous prank. This is years of rejection condensed into a single design. The chair isn't for comfort, it's for justice. Or at least for comedy, depending on how you look at it. And comedy isn't absent here. Imagine the delivery day. Picture a couple of golden automatons, polite as butlers, hauling this throne up to Olympus. No UPS tracking number, just a clanging procession of mechanical servants knocking at the divine gates. Delivery for Hera, one throne, signature required. Hera beams, delighted at the craftsmanship, proud to show it off like it's the latest luxury brand. Hermes probably snickers, whispering to Apollo, "Bet it squeaks when she sits." Then, snap. She lowers herself, settles in, maybe adjusts her gown, and the chair grips her like an overly enthusiastic hug. At first, she pretends it's fine. A bit tight, but I am the queen. I can make it work. Minutes pass. She tugs, nothing. She twists, still nothing. Finally, the realization dawns. She's trapped, held hostage by her son's handiwork. The goddess of marriage glued to her seat like a mortal stuck in superglue. Hephaestus doesn't need to see it happen. He knows. That's why the grin lingers. Half satisfaction, half ache. Revenge doesn't undo the fall, doesn't erase the limp, but it does prove a point. Even a god cast aside can design destiny for others. The forge hums around you, as if the fire itself approves. Sparks dance higher, lighting the throne in eerie gold. For a moment it seems alive, eager to fulfill its purpose. And you can't help but chuckle because if furniture could talk, this chair would probably whisper, "Go ahead, sit down, make yourself at home, forever." The throne sits gleaming, its surface smooth as still water, its edges sharp as secrets. From a distance, you'd call it the perfect seat of power. Up close, though, you start to see the catch, literally. The armrests curve like arms about to close around someone. The seat dips just enough to hold, but not enough to release. It's the ultimate design contradiction. A chair that screams sit while whispering gotcha. You run your fingers over the armrest. The metal is warm, pulsing faintly as if it has its own heartbeat. Hephaestus didn't just make a chair, he made a trap disguised as comfort. The cruel brilliance is that it only works if someone trusts it. If Hera refused the gift, nothing would happen. But who can resist a golden throne forged by the god of craftsmanship? To reject it would be to insult art itself. And Hera, queen of appearances, was never one to pass on a shiny new accessory. Fact for the night, the Greeks loved paradoxical objects in myth, things that looked generous but hid danger. Think of Pandora's jar, mistranslated later as a box, that held both hope and ruin. Or the Trojan horse, gleaming gift that concealed an army. The throne fits neatly into this tradition, beauty-wrapping betrayal. Quirky tidbit. Some vase paintings from the classical period show gods lounging on curvy, impractical chairs that look like modern art installations. You can't help but think, yeah, nobody was actually comfortable in those. Maybe the artists were slyly nodding at Hephaestus's infamous designs, or maybe ancient Greek ergonomics were just terrible. And historians still argue whether Hephaestus's trick furniture was meant to humiliate Hera alone or symbolize something broader, like the vulnerability of power when it relies on appearances. Was the throne just a personal prank, or a cultural metaphor? The debate continues, with scholars squinting at shards of pottery and trying to decode ancient sarcasm. Back in the forge, Hephaestus steps around the throne, eyes narrowed, checking each seam. You watch the precision. Every joint smooth, every hinge invisible, every chain disguised as decoration. It's art masquerading as kindness. You picture Hera gliding into the Olympian hall, running a hand over the flawless surface, thinking only of status. She won't notice the way the armrests seem to lean in slightly, the way the seat dips like a mouth ready to swallow. And isn't that the trick of traps? They only work because people want them to. Nobody forces Hera to sit. She chooses. She claims it. And the moment she does, the chair claims her back. You smirk at the thought. Ancient booby-trap furniture. If IKEA sold this today, the instruction manual would be a single step. 1. Invite enemy to sit, enjoy eternal victory. Of course, you'd lose the Allen wrench within 5 minutes anyway. The throne glows hotter as if sensing your amusement. Its golden arms glint, promising comfort and planning capture. Hephaestus doesn't smile this time. He just nods once, satisfied. The work is done. The paradox is complete. Furniture you can admire but never escape. Beauty that imprisons, hospitality that mocks. You step back and for a moment the forge feels like a showroom, but one where every piece whispers a warning. Don't get too comfortable. You hear the commotion before you see it. Imagine Olympus on an ordinary day, ambrosia flowing, harps strumming, gods lounging on couches that never stain no matter how much wine spills. And then, screeches, gasps. The kind of awkward silence that falls when something deeply undignified happens in a very public place. You round the corner, and there she is. Hera, Queen of Heaven, firmly and irreversibly stuck in Hephaestus' golden throne. At first, no one dares laugh. Zeus frowns, eyes flicking from the throne to his wife, then to the other gods, silently demanding composure. Apollo clears his throat. Hermes coughs into his hand. Dionysus, predictably, spits out wine from trying not to chuckle. Hera glares at all of them like a teacher catching her students misbehaving. She lifts her chin high, the universal signal of, this is fine, even though it absolutely is not. Fact time. In some tellings, Hera remained trapped for quite a while, unable to rise even as the other gods tried tugging at her arms. The chair didn't budge. The goddess of marriage, bound to her seat, reduced to fuming stillness. For the Greeks, this image was both scandalous and hilarious, a reminder that even divine authority could be made ridiculous. Quirky tidbit. One Roman retelling adds that Ares tried brute force, straining with all his warrior strength, only to end up yanking so hard that he fell backward, armor clanging, while Hera still sat immovable. Imagine the god of war slipping on a divine banana peel while his mother rolls her eyes in exasperation. And historians still argue whether these myths were meant as comedy at the god's expense or as veiled social commentary. Were audiences supposed to laugh at Hera's predicament or sympathize with Hephaestus's revenge? Some suggest the myth reflects resentment toward elites who sat on gilded thrones while craftsmen and workers toiled unrecognized. Others insist it was just cosmic slapstick. The jury remains stuck, much like Hera herself. The scene unfolds around you. Zeus paces, beard bristling, muttering about insubordination. Athena pinches the bridge of her nose, calculating whether siding with Hephaestus would be clever or suicidal. Poseidon guffaws too loudly, then pretends he was clearing his throat. Even Artemis sneaks a grin behind her hand. Hera, meanwhile, refuses to acknowledge the absurdity. "This throne is exceptionally comfortable," she declares through clenched teeth, as if she meant to become a permanent exhibit. You can almost hear her inner monologue. If I act like this was intentional, maybe they'll forget I'm glued to the furniture. Spoiler, they won't. And somewhere far below, in his smoky forge, Hephaestus knows. The satisfaction hums in his bones. He doesn't need to witness the chaos. He can imagine every awkward shuffle, every suppressed laugh. For once, the gods feel what he has always felt. Trapped, mocked, unable to rise. You can't help but snicker yourself. Imagine the Olympian version of a group chat blowing up. Mom stuck in chair, plus advise. The Golden Throne gleams brighter in your mind, no longer just an object but a stage, forcing Olympus into a comedy of errors. And as Hera sits fuming, you realize the irony is complete. The goddess who cast her son down now finds herself unable to stand. The Golden Throne gleams stubbornly as Hera writhes in it, a queen reduced to a fidgeting guest at her own banquet. The Olympians crowd around, a divine rescue committee with no real plan. Zeus storms back and forth, thunder practically fizzing in his beard. "Release her," he growls, as if volume alone could break enchanted metal. But Hephaestus isn't here. He's far below, safe in his forge, hammering rhythmically while the pantheon above turns into a sitcom. Apollo suggests logic. Perhaps if we examine the mechanism, he crouches beside the chair, pokes at an armrest, and immediately jerks his hand back with a hiss, burned by a hidden seam. Hera smirks despite herself. If she has to be stuck, at least she gets the small satisfaction of watching her golden boy scald his fingers. Ares, predictably, opts for violence. He grips the throne, muscles bulging, veins popping, shouting as if loudness equals leverage. The result? Nothing. The throne doesn't even wiggle. He pulls harder, trips over his own feet, and sprawls on the marble floor, clattering like a dropped toolbox. Hera doesn't laugh, but her eyes glitter dangerously, silently daring anyone else to snicker. Fact check. Myths record that the gods really did try everything. Force, persuasion, even threats. But Hephaestus had engineered the throne to resist all interference. Once you were in, you were in. No amount of brute strength could match divine craftsmanship. Quirky tidbit, some late sources say Hera wasn't just stuck. She was actually chained to the throne by invisible bonds that tightened the more she struggled. You can almost imagine the chair sighing, "Settle down, your majesty. Struggling only makes it worse." The ancient version of quicksand, but much shinier. And historians still argue whether Hephaestus's refusal to release Hera was meant to portray him as petty or principled. Was he simply getting revenge, or making a point about being excluded from Olympus? Some scholars frame it as an artisan's protest, a way of showing that those in power depend entirely on the hands they despise. Others insist it's just mythological slapstick. Either way, the debate sticks, much like Hera in her chair. Meanwhile, Hermes suggests negotiation. Maybe if we flatter him, promise him something? He's a craftsman. Surely he'd like recognition or perhaps a bribe. Zeus snarls at the word bribe, but the truth hangs in the air. They need Hephaestus, and he knows it. The Olympians shuffle awkwardly. No one wants to descend into the smoky forge to beg the lame god they usually ignore. Pride is a heavy chain, almost as binding as the throne itself. But as Hera's glare intensifies, it becomes obvious. Someone must go. You can almost hear the group debate. Zeus puffing with arrogance, Athena weighing diplomacy, Hermes cracking nervous jokes. The gods of Olympus, reduced to a squabbling committee trying to figure out how to negotiate with the one they'd cast aside. Far below, Hephaestus keeps hammering, the rhythm steady, unbothered, almost smug. He doesn't need to rush. They'll come to him eventually. The gods, usually so grand, now shuffle like awkward relatives at a family meeting no one wants to host. Zeus's thunder fizzles into muttering. Hera, still trapped, crosses her arms and declares she's perfectly comfortable, though the twitch in her jaw says otherwise. Finally, all eyes turn to one unlikely volunteer. Dionysus. The god of wine stretches, yawns, and pats his belly. "I'll go," he says, voice loose as grapevines in the breeze. Everyone stares. Dionysus? The guy who once got lost on his way to his own festival? But he just grins, grabs a skin of wine, and says, "Hephaestus will listen to me. Everyone listens after a few cups." Fact check. Ancient sources really do credit Dionysus with persuading Hephaestus to return to Olympus. The trick wasn't threats or flattery, but intoxication. Sweet, drowsy laughter that softened the stubborn smith's heart. For the Greeks, wine had power not only to loosen tongues, but to heal rifts. Quirky tidbit. Some vase paintings even show Dionysus leading Hephaestus back to Olympus on a donkey, the god of fire swaying drunkenly while satyrs dance around them. Imagine the solemn Olympians forced to watch their savior arrive like a tipsy bachelor party stumbling home. And historians still argue whether this detail reflects ritual or satire. Was the story an allegory for the integration of Dionysian cult into the Olympian order, showing wine's power to reconcile? Or was it simply comic relief? Look, the lame smith only returns because the wine god threw him a party. Scholars lean both ways, and the debate flows like wine. You follow Dionysus down into the smoky forge. The air is thick, sparks bouncing like fireflies. Hephaestus barely looks up, hammer rising and falling in its steady beat. Dionysus doesn't press. He just pours 2 cups, sets one by the anvil, and sips the other. Silence stretches, broken only by the hiss of metal meeting water. Finally, Hephaestus glances at the cup. He shrugs, takes a sip, and the corner of his mouth twitches. Wine softens even divine grudges. Before long, the two are chuckling together, Dionysus telling wild stories, Hephaestus adding dry, gruff comments that land harder than the punchlines. The forge doesn't seem so heavy anymore. The journey back to Olympus begins. Not on a chariot, not with fanfare, but on a humble donkey. Dionysus sways, singing off-key. Hephaestus clings to the saddle, snorting at the absurdity of it all. Around them, satyrs dance, pipes squealing, wine sloshing. It's less a dignified procession than a parade of chaos, and yet somehow it works. Up on Olympus, the gods wait, trying to look serious. But as Hephaestus appears, tipsy, donkey-mounted, surrounded by dancers, even Zeus cracks a grin. Hera sighs, equal parts relieved and mortified. The golden throne gleams, ready to release its prisoner once its maker gives the nod. And you think, maybe revenge has its limits, but comedy? Comedy can unseat even the fiercest grudge. The donkey's hooves fade into memory, and once more you're back in the forge. Only this time you notice movement where you thought there was none. Out of the shadows glide 2 figures, tall, gleaming, uncannily smooth. At first you think they're statues, the kind you'd find in a temple. Then one tilts its head toward you, and you realize they're alive. Not alive like you, but alive like a clock that ticks too perfectly, or a puppet that no longer needs strings. Golden attendants. That's what the myths call them, automata crafted by Hephaestus to serve in his forge. Their forms are feminine, though simplified, as if sculpted from wax and then burnished to a metallic sheen. They carry trays of tools, lift heavy ingots with ease, and move with a silence that feels stranger than any clanging machine. Historical fact. Homer himself mentions these attendants in the Iliad. They are described as golden handmaids with not only strength but also minds, endowed with speech and skill. In other words, ancient Greek poetry imagined artificial intelligence, metallic servants who could think and act on their own. Quirky tidbit. One medieval scholar quipped that these handmaids were the original prototypes for wind-up dolls, except powered by divine fire instead of springs. Imagine walking into a workshop expecting soot-stained apprentices, and instead finding golden androids pouring you tea. But historians still argue whether these creations were meant as literal automata or allegories. Did the Greeks genuinely picture robotic helpers made of gold, or were these attendants symbolic, manifestations of Hephaestus' genius, the idea that his craft itself could stand and move on its own? The debate flickers like forge fire, half mechanical speculation, half poetry. Back in the workshop, one of the golden attendants kneels, presenting a hammer to Hephaestus. He takes it without glancing, as if her presence is natural, unquestionable. Another lifts a pitcher, pouring glowing molten metal as gracefully as a servant offering wine. Their movements are smooth, practiced, unsettling. They don't breathe, yet you feel as if the room itself inhales when they pass. You shiver. It's not fear exactly, more that prickling sensation you get when technology blurs into life. You've seen robots and science documentaries, but nothing quite this elegant. These aren't clunky machines, they're companions, creations made to bridge the loneliness of a god exiled to his forge. You imagine what Olympus must think. The other gods flaunt flesh and blood attendants, nymphs, satyrs, spirits, but Hephaestus? He brings his own. Companions that don't laugh behind his back, don't judge his limp, don't gossip at banquets, just perfect golden loyalty. And there's the irony. Hera, Zeus, the whole glittering family scorned him. So he built his own family, piece by piece, hammer strike by hammer strike. Shiny, yes. Creepy, maybe. But also loyal, eternal, never turning their eyes away in disdain. You watch one attendant pause beside you. She tilts her head as though assessing. You can almost hear her think, though whether that's your imagination or her engineered spark of mind, you can't tell. She doesn't speak. She simply turns and glides away, feet making no sound on the stone. The forge seems less lonely with them moving through it, less silent, even though they say nothing. They are the echo of Hephaestus' isolation, polished into something radiant. And you can't help a small smile. Outcast gods make the best inventors. The golden attendants glide into the shadows again, leaving you alone with the hiss of the forge. You lean against the stone wall, and your mind wanders outward, beyond the smoke, beyond Olympus, into the world of mortals who whispered these stories. Because here's the curious thing. The Greeks both marveled at Hephaestus' creations and shuddered at them. They loved the gleam of perfect craft, but feared the idea of machines that might outshine, or even replace, the human touch. Fact check. Greek society put artisans in a strange spot. Blacksmiths, potters, builders, all were essential, yet their labor was often undervalued compared to the lofty pursuits of warriors, poets, and statesmen. Hephaestus' myths reflect this paradox. A god vital to Olympus, yet treated as an outsider. Quirky tidbit, one surviving text mentions self-moving tripods that Hephaestus supposedly built for Olympus banquets. They rolled themselves into the feasting hall, served food, then wheeled away again. Picture the divine dinner table, with golden carts scooting back and forth like magical Roombas. You can't help but imagine Zeus grumbling, "Why does my wine keep wandering off?" And historians still argue whether the Greeks saw these inventions as awe-inspiring fantasies or veiled anxieties. Were they celebrating the boundless creativity of craftsmanship, or warning that too much cleverness might make humans obsolete? Some modern scholars even call Hephaestus the mythological ancestor of our debates about automation. Machines replacing labor, technology replacing touch. Back in the forge, you picture mortals huddled around fires, retelling these myths. On one hand, they admired the genius, a chair so fine it could trap a goddess, a shield that carried the cosmos, golden attendants who never erred. On the other hand, they likely glanced at their own tools, their plows, their pots, and wondered if there was something unsettling about objects becoming too perfect. You chuckle quietly. It's the same today, isn't it? People marvel at robots that can cook, clean, or even write bedtime stories, and yet part of us squirms at the thought of being unnecessary. Maybe the Greeks weren't so different after all. They just dressed the anxiety in gold and called it divine. The forge glows warmer. Hephaestus himself doesn't flinch at these contradictions. To him, craft is simply craft. A tool is a tool, whether it inspires admiration or fear. He raises his hammer, strikes the anvil, and the ring echoes like an argument settled, or perhaps left deliberately unsettled. You imagine him smirking at mortals, worrying about too much invention. He knows better. Without invention, Olympus starves. Without invention, even Zeus's throne would wobble. It's not machines that replace humans. It's humans who forget to honor the hands behind the machines. The golden attendants drift back into sight, carrying fresh ingots, and suddenly you feel the paradox all over again. Beautiful, eerie, indispensable, unsettling, just like their maker. And you think, maybe Hephaestus wasn't just a god of fire. Maybe he was the god of that uneasy space where admiration and fear meet. The forge grows quieter, and for a moment you hear only the faint shuffle of Hephaestus's limp across the stone floor. Each step is uneven, one foot landing firmly, the other dragging just a beat behind. You feel the rhythm of it, a syncopation that marks every movement. And you realize this limp has followed him longer than any golden attendant, longer than any throne or shield. It is both curse and signature. Fact time. In nearly every source, Hephaestus is described as the lame one, his disability inseparable from his identity. For the Greeks, physical imperfection often came with narrative irony, heroes who were strong yet doomed, gods who were brilliant yet flawed. Hephaestus's limp made him a symbol of resilience, the genius whose worth was not in his stride but in his skill. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient vase paintings show him riding a donkey up to Olympus instead of walking, a subtle nod to his physical difference. You can almost hear the other gods whispering, "The god of fire arrives on a donkey." But honestly, it's better than Zeus's usual thunder chariot traffic jam. And historians still argue whether the limp was meant as mockery or reverence. Was Hephaestus an object of pity, tolerated only for his utility? Or was he admired precisely because he turned weakness into power? Some scholars suggest his myth reflected real Greek attitudes toward artisans, men who often bore scars or injuries from labor, yet whose skill kept cities alive. Others say the limp was a poetic shorthand for outsider genius, the one who doesn't fit but always matters. Back in the forge, you watch him settle onto a stool, breathing heavily. His face is calm, though, not bitter. He knows who he is. The limp is part of his myth, part of the rhythm of his life. Every uneven step echoes in his work. Imperfect body, perfect creations. Maybe that's why his inventions feel alive. They're compensations, extensions, ways of balancing what the world denied him. You can't help but smile at the irony. The gods of Olympus strut in perfection. Zeus with his thunder, Apollo with his flawless hair. But when mortals told stories, it was often Hephaestus's flawed figure that lingered. People remembered the god who limped because he seemed more like them. And maybe that's why you find yourself leaning closer, soothed not by the sparks, but by the steady drag of that foot on stone. Imperfection has a rhythm all its own, and Hephaestus hammers it into gold. The forge crackles, and you notice something else about Hephaestus's work. So much of it isn't just beautiful, it's cunning. Every invention seems to hold a secret purpose. Every glittering surface conceals a trap or a twist. You realize this is a pattern. Metallic snares, golden nets, thrones that imprison instead of comfort. For a god who was once cast out, creation itself has become revenge. Fact check. One of the earliest myths about Hephaestus involves him crafting chains so fine and strong they could bind even gods. When Hera mocked him, he used those chains to lock her in place, a cosmic prank and a political statement rolled into one. The Greeks knew him less as a blacksmith for hire, and more as a designer of clever punishments. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claim he once built a trap bed, yes, a bed, that ensnared Aphrodite and Ares during their secret rendezvous. When the lovers tried to rise, the golden mesh clamped tight, and the entire Olympian court came running to laugh at them. Basically, the god of fire invented the world's first caught-you-cheating booby trap. And historians still argue whether these contraptions were meant as comic relief or moral parables. Were the Greeks laughing at Hephaestus's cleverness, or learning a lesson about pride and betrayal? Some say these stories were told in banquet halls to amuse the crowd, others that they hinted at deep anxieties about how technology could expose secrets. The debate, like the trapped, never really lets anyone up. Back in the forge, you watch him work on yet another design. His limp slows him, but his hands move fast, too fast. You can see how the traps form in his mind, beauty on the outside, snare on the inside. He doesn't build brute weapons like Ares or lightning bolts like Zeus. His power lies in turning the ordinary, chairs, beds, nets, into tools of humiliation. And maybe that's the point. If you've been mocked, you learn to weaponize irony. If you've been thrown away, you make others squirm in the places they feel safest. In their chairs, in their beds, in their love affairs. You don't outfight gods. You outwit them. The forge seems to grin with him, sparks leaping higher, shadows twisting like invisible chains. You can almost hear the throne whisper to you, sit, stay, learn what it feels like. And for a moment you think, this is how an outsider evens the scales. Not with fists, but with cunning metal that refuses to let go. The sparks dim for a moment, and in the softer glow you see something more subtle than traps and revenge. You see contrast. Zeus, seated above, rules with thunderbolts, loud, flashy, impossible to miss. Apollo dazzles with light and music, Athena with polished speeches and strategy. Their power is public, performed. Hephaestus's, by comparison, hums quietly in the background. No lightning strikes, no war cries. Just hammer strikes in molten gold. Fact check. In Homeric epics, Zeus's authority is tied to spectacle. His thunderbolt flashes, his eagle soars, his throne towers above. But when the same texts mention Hephaestus, it's often in passing. The renowned craftsman, laboring in silence. Yet without him, those same thrones, temples, and weapons wouldn't exist. Quirky tidbit: the island of Lemnos, sacred to Hephaestus, once had a festival called the Hephaestia. Instead of grand parades, it featured processions of craftsmen showing their tools and wares. Imagine an ancient Greek expo, except the star attraction wasn't a celebrity poet, but a new bronze hinge that didn't squeak. And historians still argue whether this quiet power was celebrated or mocked. Some think the myths highlight how societies undervalued technical skill compared to political charisma. Others suggest Hephaestus was actually revered by working-class Greeks as a patron who proved that quiet hands could outweigh thunderous voices. Either way, his myth insists on balance. Thunderbolts may awe, but hammers sustain. Back in the forge, you lean against the wall and watch him. There's no speech, no performance, just focus. Each movement is economical, deliberate, efficient. He doesn't need applause. The applause will come later, when gods sit on thrones they can't escape, or mortals lift shields that gleam like stars. You realize this is the essence of Hephaestus: craft over charisma, substance over show. He doesn't rule the skies or the seas, but he shapes the very tools by which others rule. He doesn't throw banquets, he builds the tables for them. He doesn't command armies, he forges their armor. The irony is rich. Zeus might thunder, but without Hephaestus, there's no throne to sit on while he does it. Power needs a platform. And who built the platform? The god in the smoky forge, limping, uninvited, indispensable. The hammer rises and falls, steady as a heartbeat. And you think, maybe true power isn't the kind that dazzles in an instant. Maybe it's the kind that endures, unnoticed, beneath the flash. The forge glows steady, and yet your mind drifts upward again, imagining the next twist in Hephaestus's life. Marriage. Not just any marriage, but the most improbable pairing in all Olympus. The limping smith bound to Aphrodite, goddess of beauty, desire, and every love poem that ever made a teenager sigh. It's the kind of match that makes you squint, tilt your head, and say, "Really? Them?" Fact check. Most versions of the myth say Zeus arranged the union, perhaps as a reward to Hephaestus for freeing Hera from the Golden Throne. It was a political move, tying the least glamorous god to the most glamorous goddess, as if balance could be restored by wedding opposites. Quirky tidbit: ancient playwrights love to poke fun at this mismatch. Comedy fragments describe Aphrodite sneaking out of her husband's smoky forge-smelling bedchamber, rolling her eyes, muttering about soot stains on her gowns. The audience would roar, because what could be more absurd than the goddess of passion stuck in a workshop with a man who prefers anvils to pillow talk? And historians still argue whether this marriage was satire aimed at the gods or a reflection of Greek social anxieties. Was it a cosmic joke? Ugly man with beautiful wife destined for betrayal? Or was it a reminder that beauty alone doesn't guarantee happiness? Some scholars suggest it was moral commentary. Others insist it was just mythic sitcom material. Back in the forge, you watch Hephaestus polish a delicate bracelet, gold twisted into vines and roses. You imagine him presenting it to Aphrodite, hands clumsy but heart careful. She smiles politely, accepts it, wears it to the next banquet, then slips away when she thinks no one is looking. You sigh because you already know who she's meeting. Ares, god of war, muscles flexing, armor clanking. The fiery passion Aphrodite craves is not in the forge's steady rhythm, but in the battlefield's chaos. And there's the tragedy. Hephaestus is loyal, devoted, endlessly creative. But devotion doesn't always win against desire. His marriage becomes a story whispered in corners, God smirking at the irony. The outcast finally gained a wife, and she'd rather be anywhere else. Still, you picture him sitting at his anvil, working late into the night, knowing but not saying, channeling every ache into golden filigree. Maybe his limp slowed him, maybe his love life mocked him, but his craft never betrayed him. The hammer falls again, sparks rise, and you think, sometimes the gods gave Hephaestus cruelty instead of kindness, jokes instead of joy. And yet somehow he kept creating beauty anyway. The forge seems to hush for a moment, as if it knows the story about to unfold is both tragic and a little embarrassing. You lean closer, watching Hephaestus set aside a half-finished goblet, his eyes narrowing not at the flames, but at memories. Marriage to Aphrodite was one thing. Living with her unfaithfulness was another. And Hephaestus, who could bind gods with chains finer than spider silk, wasn't the kind of husband to let betrayal go unchecked. Fact check. One of the most famous episodes in Greek myth is Hephaestus's trap for Aphrodite and her lover Ares. Knowing their affair, he forged an invisible net of gold so fine and light that no eye could detect it, yet so strong that not even gods could break it once sprung. He laced it over the bed he shared with Aphrodite, biding his time until the inevitable. Quirky tidbit, some later Roman poets had fun with this myth, adding slapstick touches. They describe Ares rushing into the bedroom in full armor, eager for passion but clattering like a kitchen dropped on the floor. Then, snap, the golden mesh slams down. Instead of romance, the lovers find themselves tangled like fish in a net, wriggling uselessly while the bed creaks beneath them. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear Aphrodite sighing. Really? Again with the traps? And historians still argue whether this myth was meant as moral instruction or pure comedy. Was it a warning about infidelity, showing that even gods couldn't escape consequences? Or was it a banquet hall joke, told with wine in hand, more about laughing at Ares' red-faced humiliation than sympathizing with Hephaestus? The debate is ongoing, tangled like the net itself. Picture it, the moment of capture. Aphrodite and Ares frozen, limbs entwined, unable to budge. Hephaestus doesn't roar in anger. Instead, he quietly invites the rest of Olympus to come and see. And they do, streaming in, one by one, like nosy neighbors answering a fire alarm. Poseidon doubles over with laughter. Apollo smirks behind his hand. Hermes cracks jokes about lovebirds caught nesting. Even Zeus, usually stern, can't help a chuckle at the sight of the war god writhing helplessly. You wince in sympathy for Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty reduced to spectacle. You wince even harder for Ares, who probably wished for a battlefield instead of this mortifying stage. But most of all, you feel the sharp edge of Hephaestus's revenge. It isn't violence, it's exposure. He takes their private passion and drags it under the brightest light possible. That's his weapon, humiliation forged into golden strands. And yet, as you sit in the forge watching the net glimmer in memory, you wonder if Hephaestus truly won. The laughter of the gods was loud, yes, but fleeting. Aphrodite didn't stop desiring others. Ares didn't stop swaggering. Hephaestus didn't suddenly gain respect or affection. All he gained was the satisfaction of proving he could outwit even love and war themselves. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe it was just another reminder that wit doesn't always buy happiness. The forge crackles, and you think about how strangely modern this feels. It's the ancient equivalent of airing someone's dirty laundry on social media. Dramatic, humiliating, unforgettable, and yet rarely solving the problem it claims to. Hephaestus invented the world's first public scandal, complete with spectators and jeers. Still, you can't help admiring the craftsmanship. That net wasn't just strong, it was invisible until it was too late. Hephaestus turned betrayal into design, sorrow into ingenuity. You watch him, bent over his anvil, hammering steadily, and realize that even his heartbreak burns down into gold. The memory of the net lingers in the smoke, shimmering faintly like strands of light stretched too thin. And you think love may slip, loyalty may break, but craft endures. The forge flickers, and this time the sparks don't form a throne or a net, but scatter into dozens of odd shapes. Rolling tripods, swinging doors, gleaming trinkets that hum with a life of their own. You blink, because Hephaestus doesn't just stop at thrones or humiliating nets. His imagination runs wild, churning out inventions nobody asked for, but everyone ends up talking about. Fact check. Homer describes how Hephaestus built 20 golden tripods, each mounted on wheels, able to roll themselves into the Olympian feast hall. Imagine banquet furniture with built-in autopilot. They carried food and wine, waited patiently for guests, and then trundled back to the forge when dismissed. The first room service carts, except glowing and slightly unsettling. Quirky tidbit. Later stories claim Hephaestus also rigged the doors of Olympus to open and close automatically, powered by hidden mechanisms. You picture Zeus stepping grandly into the hall as the doors slide apart with a whoosh, like an ancient version of walking into a grocery store with automatic glass doors. The divine effect is slightly ruined when you realize the mechanism probably squeaked at least once, and historians still argue whether these machines were meant literally or symbolically. Were the Greeks envisioning genuine proto-robots and engineering marvels? Or were they using myth to describe the awe of watching ordinary doors, hinges, or carts crafted so well they seemed alive? Some even suggest these myths preserve whispers of real early technologies, bronze automata, clever hydraulics, devices that impressed enough to blur into legend. Back in the forge, you watch Hephaestus test a tripod. It wobbles forward, pauses, then pivots toward you with an unnervingly eager bounce. You step aside quickly, muttering, "No thanks, I've had dinner." The tripod rolls past, smug in its usefulness. Another automaton glides by with a tray of goblets, one sloshing wine dangerously close to the edge. You catch it just in time, and for a second you swear the machine tilts its head in thanks. Not every invention is practical, though. Some are more like flexes, because I can projects. Shiny shields engraved with constellations no soldier could actually navigate by. Helmets so ornate they'd blind you in sunlight. Jewelry too delicate to wear without snapping. You imagine the Olympians politely clapping when presented with these gifts, then whispering later, "Beautiful, but do we really need a helmet that doubles as a sundial?" And yet, there's something mesmerizing about this endless tinkering. While other gods lounge on clouds, Hephaestus never stops building. His forge is crowded with experiments. Doors that swing on their own, tripods that wander like pets, statues that blink when no one's watching. The place is part workshop, part museum, part mad scientist's lab. The smoke swirls, and you realize this is Hephaestus's joy as much as his burden. His mind doesn't rest. He invents because he must, because each idea demands to be hammered into gold. Whether the gods appreciate it or not is irrelevant. His workshop hums with half-finished dreams, and every spark promises another marvel nobody asked for, but everyone remembers. The forge smolders around you, the light rising and falling like a heartbeat. For a moment you think the story of Hephaestus is running out of sparks. How many thrones, traps, and gadgets can one god make? And yet something stirs in the haze that feels bigger than comedy, bigger than revenge. The smoke itself seems to split into two shapes. One laughing, one thoughtful. And you realize this is where myth begins to blur into something uncanny. Were the inventions of Hephaestus satire, just divine slapstick props for the gods' private sitcoms? Or were they prophecies, faint previews of a future where machines hum and wheels turn without hands? You let the question hang in the hot air as the golden attendants glide past, their faces blank but strangely expressive, their movements graceful in ways your own appliances could never dream of. A chair that traps a goddess might sound like a gag, the kind of story to share over wine and olives. But what about those tripods that rolled into banquets on their own? What about the doors that swung open without a servant's push? They sound less like myth and more like blueprints. Fact check. Aristotle once speculated about tools that could work by themselves. In his Politics, he muses that if shuttles could weave on their own and plectrums could strum lyres by themselves, then masters would no longer need servants. He wrote this not as fantasy, but as a serious thought experiment about freedom and labor. Yet when you read it now, it sounds uncannily like a philosopher tipping his head toward Hephaestus's forge. Quirky tidbit. Medieval scribes loved this myth of rolling tripods so much that some doodled their own versions in margins of manuscripts. Imagine a monk, hunched over a candlelit desk, carefully copying Homer, then pausing to sketch a little tripod with comically oversized wheels, maybe even adding a smirk to its face. The margin notes of history become its own quiet laughter, proof that people centuries later still found the idea of furniture with legs hilariously irresistible. And historians still argue what these stories were meant to be. Were the tripods and automata pure allegory, ways of saying Hephaestus' genius was so great that his tools seemed alive? Or were they half-remembered glimpses of real technological marvels, perhaps clever hydraulic toys or ingenious clockwork that impressed ancient audiences enough to blur into myth? The debate burns like a forge fire that never quite cools. You sit on a stone ledge, watching the attendants glide, and can't shake the familiarity. In your own world, you've seen robots dance, drones deliver packages, vacuums patrol floors at night like metallic pets. The Greeks didn't have wires or batteries, but they had imagination. And sometimes imagination leaps farther than technology itself. Hephaestus' myths feel like time travelers, winking at futures not yet built. The forge's air thickens, and you imagine an Olympian tech demo. Picture it. Zeus perched on his throne, skeptical, thunderbolt in hand, like a nervous father holding car keys. Apollo arms crossed, already unimpressed. Hermes live commenting to whoever will listen. Then Hephaestus steps aside, silent, letting the inventions roll forward. A tripod clatters gracefully into the hall, laden with golden cups. Doors swing open with no push. Golden attendants pour wine with uncanny smoothness. For a moment, even the gods are speechless. And then, of course, someone ruins it. Ares knocks a tripod over, demanding to know if it can fetch him a spear. Dionysus asks if the automaton handmaid can dance. Hera frowns, muttering that all this cleverness feels suspicious. Half laughter, half awe. Was that Hephaestus' goal all along? To leave them uneasy, never certain whether to marvel or mock? You chuckle because you know this feeling too well. Every new gadget sparks the same reaction. Excitement, suspicion, curiosity, and a whisper of dread. Maybe a chair that traps a goddess is just a divine gag. But maybe it's also a reminder that comfort always comes with a catch. And you wonder about Hephaestus himself. Did he laugh when his inventions unsettled the gods? Or did he hammer in silence, leaving the interpretation to others? The forge offers no answer. The attendants glide by again, their golden limbs catching sparks, and you swear you hear a faint creak like whispered laughter. The smoke curls around you, heavy and thoughtful. It carries both giggles and questions, like a dinner guest who tells a joke you can't quite decide is funny or alarming. Was Hephaestus just entertaining Olympus, giving them shiny toys and humiliating pranks? Or was he sketching the outlines of futures where machines walk and doors swing on their own, where craft replaces servants, and where the line between myth and invention blurs? The forge breathes hot, steady. You close your eyes, and for a moment you picture not gods, but modern cities. Sliding doors sighing open at a grocery store. Robots serving plates in restaurants. Machines whirring as if they had minds of their own. And somewhere in that image, you see a limping god at his anvil, hammering patiently, centuries ahead of his time. The forge's glow softens, and the smoke that usually curls into thrones and traps now spreads into gentler shapes. Faces, hands, crowds. Not Olympians this time, but mortals. Blacksmiths at their anvils, potters at their wheels, seamstresses bent over looms, all of them turning sweat into substance. You realize that for all the divine gossip and cosmic pranks, Hephaestus meant something far deeper to people on the ground. He wasn't just the trickster engineer of Olympus. He was the patron of everyone who toiled unseen. Fact check. Archaeological evidence shows that workshops of metalworkers and craftsmen were often located at the edges of Greek cities. Their work was essential. Plows, tools, armor, jewelry. But their smoky, noisy forges kept them apart from civic life. Hephaestus mirrored this, a god who belonged to Olympus but was pushed to its margins, embodying both usefulness and exclusion. Quirky tidbit: on the island of Lemnos, sacred to Hephaestus, locals celebrated him with a festival called the Hephaestia. Instead of grand sacrifices or chariot races, The rituals honored fire, tools, and labor. Some accounts even suggest torches were carried in procession, symbolizing the passing of flame and skill from one hand to the next, an ancient take your torch to work day. And historians still argue whether Hephaestus was primarily worshipped as a divine craftsman or as a figure of resistance, an emblem for those who felt overlooked. Was he honored because he gave mortals weapons and tools, or because he reminded them that even the lame, the cast out, the mocked could wield power? The debate runs deep, echoing in every hammer strike across centuries. You picture an Athenian artisan whispering a quick prayer before lighting his forge. Guide my hands, Hephaestus. Not a lofty hymn, not an epic poem, but a murmur over sparks. Hephaestus wasn't just a myth to them. He was solidarity, proof that perfection wasn't the only path to greatness. And you imagine the outcasts, too, the limping, the scarred, the awkward, finding comfort in his story. A god who didn't fit the glittering mold of Olympus, yet shaped the very furniture those glittering gods sat on. A reminder that exclusion doesn't erase value, sometimes it sharpens it. Back in the forge, you glance at the golden attendants again. They're perfect, yes, but perfection isn't what makes Hephaestus resonate. It's the limp, the exile, the stubborn return. The way his story tells every overlooked hand, you matter, and your work shapes the world even if the world forgets your name. The smoke drifts upward, carrying that message like a whispered prayer, and you feel a quiet weight settle in your chest, not heavy but grounding. The forge flickers one last time, but instead of glowing brighter, the flames dim. The gold loses its glare and softens into a gentle sheen, like candlelight against warm stone. You sense the story winding down, not ending abruptly, but easing into a slower rhythm, as though even Hephaestus himself is ready to set the hammer aside. You think again of that strange paradox. Golden furniture too beautiful to touch, too dangerous to use. Was it art? Was it vengeance? Maybe both. The myths insist the gods laughed, squabbled, bargained. But beneath the laughter, something more lasting remained. The idea that beauty could deceive, that comfort could conceal, that invention always carries a whisper of unease. Fact check. Across centuries, artists painted and sculpted Hephaestus, not with the glamour of Apollo or the majesty of Zeus, but always with his limp, his hammer, and his forge. They remembered him less as a ruler and more as a worker, a craftsman whose creations outlived the laughter of Olympus. Quirky tidbit. In the Renaissance, artists revived Hephaestus under his Roman name, Vulcan, often painting him in workshops that suspiciously resembled their own. One even included a half-finished globe in the corner, as if hinting that this limping god was still building the world itself. You can't help but smile at the thought. The god of golden traps rebranded as a Renaissance tinkerer. And historians still argue what to make of him today. Was he satire, comic relief in myths otherwise filled with thundering heroes? Was he a symbol of ingenuity, the divine craftsman ahead of his time? Or was he something gentler, the protector of those who labor unseen, who limp through life but keep creating anyway? The debate drifts on, unresolved, like sparks carried by the wind. You glance one last time at the Golden Throne. It gleams faintly, the trap silent now, no goddess bound within it. You run your hand across its smooth surface. It feels cool, steady, almost ordinary, like any chair. But you know better. You know it's more than furniture. It's a reminder that sometimes the shiniest promises hold the sharpest surprises. The forge exhales. The attendants vanish into shadow. Hephaestus himself steps back, not smiling, not frowning, just resting, as if his work is finished for now. And so the story softens, loosens its grip, invites you to lean back into your own chair, hopefully one that won't snap shut around you. The flames settle into embers, their glow fading into soft orange, then into ash-gray stillness. The noise of hammering is gone now. No sparks leap, no gold hums. Only the faint warmth remains, wrapping you like a blanket that doesn't need mending, one that simply holds. You breathe slower, the air no longer hot with smoke, but gentle, like a quiet tide retreating. The forge melts into darkness, and in that darkness, you imagine yourself safe, untroubled. No chairs snapping shut, no laughter echoing above, just you and the soft hum of night. Remember the golden furniture, its sheen, its traps, its irony. Remember how even the gods could be humbled by a simple seat. And remember, too, that the outcast smith, mocked and cast down, still shaped the world with his hands. That is the gift of Hephaestus, proof that imperfections forge their own kind of beauty, quiet and enduring. Your thoughts slow, stretching long and soft. Images fade. The thrones gleam, the golden attendants, the donkey ride, the rolling tripods. Each detail drifts away like sparks dissolving into the sky. What remains is calm, a steady rhythm, as if the forge's heartbeat has become your own. Let the story rest now. Let your eyelids lower, heavy as cooled metal. There's no more trick furniture waiting, no more gods bickering overhead. Only the warmth of the forge turned into stillness, and the gentle truth that even in a world of thunder and beauty, the quiet hammer rings the longest. Sleep then, drift. Let Hephaestus's workshop fade into dream, where every spark is harmless, and every chair welcomes you home.